Welcome back, guys. I'm Obaid, and today we're diving into another topic, home inspections. And a fun fact for you, more than 60% of homes in Ottawa are actually over 30 years old, and that's why it's important to go through a home inspection more than ever. And that's where our guest today comes in handy, Eric Parent. He's been in the business since 1997, and he, on his own, inspected more than 10,000 homes. Thank you for coming in today, Eric, and we appreciate you very much.
Thank you for having me.
So before we dive into topic of home inspections, if you could just tell us a little bit about your background and what made you specialize in home inspections.
Sure. Yeah, I was always a little bit into construction. My father was a civil engineer, and he owned a lot of properties. So I used to do help him with repairs and renos, and that's how I kind of started into construction and renovations. And then I also studied Algonquin, I studied at Carleton in civil engineering technology and civil engineering. And then I started working for my father part-time in 97. I did about a year of training, off-site training at the office, studying.
Yeah.
And then from 98 to 2000, I did 2 years of on-the-job training with my father. The first year, I was shadowing him as he did the inspection. Then the second year, I would do the inspection and he would shadow me.
Yeah.
And then since 2000, late 2000, early 2001, I started doing my own jobs, working for my father. And then in 2008, I took over the company.
Wow.
And I've been going at it since then.
That's pretty impressive. I think you're the most experienced guest I've ever had till day. Yes, I kid you not. Yeah. Eric, I know you go through by a refined multi-phase home inspections. When you do those inspections for homes, what's the first phase like?
The first phase is actually before the inspection. It's when I do what I call the onboarding. So I reach out to the client, I send a welcome email, say, hi, I'm Eric, I'm your home inspector. We set up the appointment if it's not already preset, and ask them if they have any questions, and I prepare the contracts and everything.
Yeah.
I also pull the listing for the inspection, so I like to go over the listing, go over the photos, just so I know what I'm getting into before I arrive. So that's the initial phase.
Okay, and once this step is done, what's the next step?
Next step would be the inspection. So I arrive on site, I meet the client in person, sort of meet and greet, ask them if they have any questions before we start, and then shortly after that we proceed with the inspection, and I always encourage them to follow me around during that.
Okay, when you're on site doing the inspections, what would you say is unique about the way that you like to do your own inspections?
Some of my colleagues, other home inspectors that I know of, I believe we all pretty much follow the same approach, more or less. Me personally, I like to encourage a client to follow me around during the inspection. Some inspectors prefer not to. Some inspectors prefer to do their own thing and then sit with the client afterwards.
Yeah.
I'm more of the side that I find it's better for the client to follow me around, because then I can explain everything in person. If there's a problem, I can explain to them why it's a problem, how it should be corrected properly. And it's a good opportunity for the client to learn about the home. Just things like how to shut off the water when they go on vacation, or where the breaker panel is, just the basic stuff that homeowner should know.
And what's the last phase of the whole inspection?
The last phase is after the inspection. It's the post-inspection phase. Now it's a little bit unique to us. It goes a little bit beyond the typical home inspection. So at the office, I do a number of things. I do a geotechnical research. So I like to learn about the soils that the house is on, and that kind of falls more towards our engineering side.
Okay.
Because particularly in Ottawa, there's a lot of geotechnical issues, Leda clay, radon, things like that. So I like to research to find out what the house is sitting on. Also, I do sewer data research. I log into the city GIS system and I check, what type of sewer is the house connected to. So there's that, and also I do a photographic analysis, which is a little bit unique to us. So during the inspection, I take hundreds of photos and I review them all for quality assurance, basically.
So I know you actually use a lot of cameras. We're going to go through that. But basically, when you take photos, when you take videos, how do they help you do the inspection? Because you're already on site, right? You're doing everything.
Yeah.
So why would you take all those recordings?
It's mainly for quality assurance. Like I said, we do a photographic analysis after the inspection. It allows us to kind of review everything. So, and sometimes some things can be difficult to see from the naked eye. So, for example, roofs. We look at the roof from street level, as the inspectors do. And sometimes, even with binoculars, it's hard to spot, if it's a small tear in one of the shingles, for example. So photographic analysis, particularly for the outdoors, I use a high zoom camera, telephoto camera, and then I take multiple photos from each section of the roof from multiple angles.
Okay.
So then at the office, each one could be blown up on a big screen, and we can really examine in detail.
I saw something very unique, which is you use a chest-mounted video camera.
Yeah, a body cam.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a home inspector that.
It's I don't know if as far as my colleagues that I know personally, they don't. I'm the only one that does. I don't know if I'm the only one in Ottawa, but it's not common. But yeah, I do wear a body cam. I've been using one for about 3 years now. I use it I started wearing it for insurance purposes because I had a colleague, another home inspector in the States, who the vendor sued him because accused him of stealing a watch. So I was like,
so it could actually protect you as well.
Yeah,
which is pretty smart.
It's never happened to me. I've never had litigation issues or anything, but you never know. But I find it's actually a good quality assurance tool. So I like to record the entire inspection.
Okay.
That way, when I'm doing the photographic analysis back at the office, I replay the entire inspection video. So it's basically doing the inspection twice over.
Okay.
In case I had forgotten to take a voice note of, say, the age of the furnace or the age of the water heater or a particular issue, I get to kind of replay the whole process.
Speaking about commercial properties, how do residential and commercial properties differ? And is there a unique way of inspections when you inspect either one of them?
The inspection process between residential and commercial is pretty similar. The building is a building in a way. You have foundation, cladding, interior structure, electrical, plumbing. But there are some unique characteristics to a commercial inspection versus a residential inspection. So one thing would be electrical. Commercial buildings usually have commercial power, which is different from residential power. It's a three-phase, higher voltage, versus residential, which is a single-phase power. And also with commercial, you kind of have to keep more in mind of your client's intentions for the building. So, are they planning on building an automotive repair shop, for example? So if they're building an auto repair shop, you have to consider, is there enough power to run all the compressors, the lifts, the welders? Are they planning to do a restaurant? I do a lot of restaurants. And, are the coolers adequate? Is the fire suppression system functional for the stove hoods?
In Ottawa's competitive market, I know pre-offer walkthroughs are becoming more popular. How do they help buyers make a decision?
Pre-offer walkthroughs, what I call MCCs, major component consultations. Particularly during the seller's market, there was an inventory shortage period, and there's a lot of competition for houses. And it was getting to the point where sellers were refusing inspections, so you could only go in with an unconditional offer. So I started hearing stories and clients calling me after purchase with major issues with their homes. So I felt generally bad for them. So I came up with the MCC process. So it's basically a quick inspection that can be done in less than an hour. So during a showing appointment.
Okay.
And it gives me enough time to check the major components, make sure there's no problem with the foundation, the furnace isn't expired, the roof isn't leaking. So they can have the peace of mind to make an unconditional offer without having any sudden surprises come up after the purchase.
Besides general inspections, I know you also handle asbestos. Can you tell us what is it and what risk does it carry?
For residential, basically you have three types. You have type 1, type 2, and type 3 when it comes to asbestos abatement. For residential, most of it is type 1, type 2. That would be things like asbestos in drywall compound, duct wrap insulation on ducts in older homes that had oil furnaces, a fire protection board between supply registers in older homes. The main issue for asbestos with residential homes is actually the type 3, which would be vermiculite insulation.
Okay.
You see that in older homes, and it can be, if it's contaminated with asbestos, about a third of it is, it's extremely costly to remove.
Radon is also something that you inspect. What is it? How risky is it?
So radon is becoming a popular topic. It's a bit of a hot issue these days. It's a radioactive gas. It comes from uranium. When you're close to bedrock, and there's a lot of uranium, natural uranium in the bedrock, uranium being radioactive, as it decomposes from radioactivity, produces a radioactive gas called radon. And radon gas will tend to build up in the soil. And if you're in an area that's close to the bedrock and there's a lot of uranium, then the soil gas can build up and then it can release. And if you have points of entry in your home where the radon can get into your home, it could be a health issue. Next to smoking, radon is a leading cause of lung cancer.
Okay.
It also causes radiation-related illnesses like birth defects, genetic mutations, things like that.
And basically, like, this is how radon gas enters the house.
Yeah, exactly. So with an urban home,
So that's the bedrock that you were talking about.
exactly. So if you're close to bedrock, particularly if it's uranium-rich bedrock, and uranium decomposes, creates the pockets of radon gas. And if you have things like cracks in your basement floor slab or cracks in your foundation wall, that's where the gas can get into the building envelope.
Tell us a little bit about what is this exactly?
So that's a dosimeter. So
Dosimeter.
for radon testing, you can get a rapid test done. Some companies offer that. They call it a snapshot test.
Okay.
It's basically, you go in, it's a meter, you take a reading of an air sample, and it tells you if there's radon. The problem with that, and the reason why the government doesn't recommend that either, is radon gas levels can fluctuate wildly depending on the time of year or even the time of day.
Yeah.
So if you take just a snapshot reading, it might say you only have 20 becquerels per cubic meter, but then you come back 2 months later, it might be 300. So I recommend the same as what the government recommends, which is a long-term test, particularly a dosimeter test. Dosimeter is kind of old school technology, as I say. It's the same technology that like radiation inspectors, they wear the patches on their suits. There's a screen, a mesh, and it catches, if there's any alpha radiation particles, it'll etch the mesh. So we recommend getting a dosimeter. There's a good one on Amazon by AccuStar Canada. It's affordable, inexpensive, and it's basically a little plastic cup. You leave it out for 6 months, preferably over the winter, and then you put it in the return envelope and send it back for lab testing.
Okay, and then you would know if you have contamination. Of
the lab will send you a report, and they'll tell you what are the highest readings. The national limit, safety limit, is 200 becquerels per cubic.
Are asbestos and radon issues common in Ottawa and Gatineau homes, or?
As far as asbestos, pretty much any house built before 1990 has a potential for asbestos. I mean, like I said, vermiculite is the big thing. That's really expensive to remove. And that you'd be looking at in pre-70s. But yeah, right up to 1990, you might have asbestos in the drywall compound. Older pre-war homes often have asbestos duct wrap because of the old oil furnaces. So it can be fairly common. I mean, you're seeing it less and less because it's slowly being abated as houses buy and sell. But we do come across it time to time.
Okay. And are there any common areas where radon would be found more than other areas?
So like I was saying earlier, basically if you're near bedrock, so that would be Canada, west of Canada. So if you're going, Mississippi Mills, Carleton Place, Smith Falls, there's kind of a triangle there.
What about the Quebec side?
Cantley, Chelsea, in the hills, Gatineau Park, a lot of bedrock there. And also on the Ontario side, if you're going east, from Cumberland to Rockland along the river, definitely a lot of radon there. Meter.
You deal with new built homes, right? I had a client one time told me that he doesn't want to inspect the house because it was a new built, and I made sure we get it inspected. So what's the common issues that you find in
and I get that often. A lot of people ask me, is it worth getting an inspection on a brand new home? And I kind of laugh, and I'm sure my fellow home inspectors are probably laughing too, because we actually tend to find more issues with new construction than resale homes.
Wow.
Because the problem with new construction is you're dealing with a lot of the builder errors, construction errors. And, builders and trades, they're human like all of us. So, errors, mistakes get made. And the thing is, so when people are buying a new home, they think, well, it's brand new. What could be wrong? Thinking like it's a brand new car, but it's not. A home is very different. And it's not
insured.
And it's not insured. I mean, Tarion offers you a warranty protection, but one, you need to know what to look for. And most homeowners, things that could be major issues that don't seem like issues, they don't look like issues, and they don't know how to identify those things. So that's why we always recommend getting inspection done, because we can spot problems that could be major problems in the future before it's too late, before your Tarion warranty expires.
In your inspections, you use a wide range of different tools. So we have them prepared. Basically, we just want to go through them and for you to tell us why do you need all those tools and what do you use them for. So let's start simple. So those are the lighting tools, right? Why do you actually have two different types of flashlights? So
one common joke among us home inspectors is we love our flashlights. It's probably our most used and useful tool. I always carry two. I have two in holsters on my right hip. I use as my primary light, which is my spotty or my spotlight. I use a Phoenix TK16, and my secondary light, which is my floodie or a floodlight, I use a Nikkor P20IX. And because especially when you're in crawl spaces, attics, basements,
There
dark
isn't gonna be
areas.
any lights
Exactly,
for you to actually
exactly.
use. Yeah. And aside from lights, you also use a lot of recording tools. Now, we already spoke about your body camera.
Yep.
But so what do you use the pole camera
So the pole cam is it's about a 30-foot telescopic pole, and it's got a camera gimbal mount on it.
Okay.
So I use my my indoor camera. I attach it to the mount, and that's wirelessly controlled.
Okay.
So then I can send the pole cam up. So if it's say for like a flat roof and it's 2-3 stories up, I can send the pole cam up there, and then using my phone, I can control the camera, and I just kind of rotate it. I can zoom in, zoom out, and that's where the
Okay.
photographic analysis comes in.
Yeah.
And I take 100 photos of every section of the flat roof with the pole cam. So.
Okay. And then you have your, it says outdoor camera. You use the Panasonic.
That's I like the Lumix FZ80. It's got a 60x zoom and it's a point and shoot, so it's simple to operate.
Yeah.
And with the high zoom, it's great for really getting up close and personal with a roof. Because sometimes when you're at street level and the roof is 3 stories up, it's it's hard to spot little issues. So
Yeah.
With the 60x optical zoom, you can really spot even a little missing nail in a flashing or something.
Also have your Doka pole.
So the Doka pole, that's part of my pole cam system. So it's
Okay.
so it's basically a telescopic pole, comes in multiple sections and extends up to about 24 to 30 feet. And on the top, there's a gimbal mount for a camera. So it's pretty useful.
It's an accessory. You have the crawler robot.
Crawler robot, yeah. It's kind of like a bomb disposal robot. So not too many inspectors use them, but I find it useful for things like crawl spaces, especially mobile homes.
Yeah.
The problem with mobile homes is there's not much clearance under there. It's hard to really get in there. So before I would just use the pole cam, but even with the pole, it's hard to kind of work around.
Yeah.
With Robbie the robot, I can send him in there, and he's got an optical camera, infrared camera, the whole works, floodlights, and
Okay. Even
and
infrared is.
controlled with a 6-axis remote control with a screen on it. So
Yeah.
I have a first-person view, and it's on track. So
You got the drone on.
in some cases, the drone is necessary.
Yeah.
Particularly if I'm doing, say, a commercial building that's 5 stories up, and it's
Yeah.
just too high for my pole cam to reach.
Yeah.
And there's no roof access from the building, so that's where Johnny Fly comes in, and and you can get up there and fly around and take some good shots.
Okay, we got the moisture meter. Basically, from the name, right?
Yep.
But how good is it to actually detect?
So with moisture meters, I mean, there's all sorts of ranges. There's cheap basic ones. There's
Okay.
more expensive ones. You can get ones on Amazon for $20-$30, and like basic pin type moisture meters,
Yeah.
and they'll do the job. I personally prefer, and I've been through a lot of different moisture meters in my career. I like the General Tools MMP
Yeah.
950. It's a deep penetration moisture meter, so it uses an induction. I think called induction with the ball probe, and can scan about 4 to 6 inches deep into materials. So
Okay.
even
so
if
it detects moisture
behind.
behind.
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly.
Okay.
So even if the drywall looks dry and clean, if the concrete behind it is wet, it'll pick it up.
We got the electric outlet tester. Just to test the outlets
Yep.
of electricity.
Checking for ground fault protection, make sure it's properly wired, polarity's correct.
Okay.
It's not an open ground. Induction detector, it's also known as a non-contact voltage detector.
Okay.
It's basically for checking to see if wires are live.
Okay.
Particularly handy for knob and tube wiring. You see in very old buildings.
Yeah.
It'll detect, you just basically place it near a wire or a switch or a plug, and if there's live voltage, it'll pick it up from the electromagnetic
Just
field.
like the moisture. So basically, it's
Yep, exactly.
flare C5 infrared camera.
Yep.
And also, this is a photo from you.
Yeah,
Inspecting a house.
Yeah, this
So-
was from my previous camera, which
Yeah.
was my HIK camera. Now I use the FLIR C5. And this was an older, it was actually a commercial building I was doing. And
Okay.
they had converted the attic into living space, into a loft, a couple of offices. And it was in the middle of summer, and I was doing an infrared thermographic imaging. And
Yeah.
the end gable, which was now an interior wall, was just glowing bright yellow. And that's from the sun beaming on the outside of it. And the fact that you can see the thermal bridging from the wall studs in the end gable tells me that there's no insulation in that cavity.
Okay.
So yeah, the FLIR, it allows you to spot hidden things, particularly insulation issues or moisture issues. If there's leakage, it'll show as a cold spot. And then I go in with the moisture meter to get a precise
Okay.
reading.
Are there any particular scenarios where some of these tools actually make a huge difference in what you can identify.
Yeah, definitely. The pole cam is particularly useful, particularly areas where you just can't see from down on the ground.
Yeah.
For example, here's a commercial building. It was a restaurant that I did recently. You couldn't see the flat roof, obviously, from ground level, and there's no roof access.
Okay.
So I went around my pole cam to catch various, went all the way around and high
Yeah.
zoom, low zoom. And for example, here we could see that the head wall flashing between the restaurant and the building next to it is pulled up. And during the photographic analysis, I blew that up and I could see that the lip of the flashing was off completely. So they were getting leakage going into that wall cavity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this also on the roof?
Also on the roof, same
Okay.
building. And this is actually a chimney stack. And they have a wood burning, like a wood oven. And the flashing from the chimney stack had pulled up. Now, they used a whole bunch of elastomeric bitumen sealant, basically roofing sealant. You can see all the black goop there,
Yeah.
which is not really a proper repair.
Is
So
that them trying to fix it?
that's them trying to fix it, but I'm sure they were getting quite a lot of roof leaks from that, and I did pick up moisture underneath.
Okay. Let's talk about some of the common issues that you find in home inspections, specifically plumbing and structural issues.
Structural issues actually don't come up that often, at least nothing major structural. They do sometimes, but it's actually pretty rare. I do occasionally come across minor structural issues. A good example would be a notched floor joist.
We're talking about this one right there, right?
That one,
So the
right there,
notch
exactly.
joist.
So a notched joist.
So this is a structural issue.
Exactly, because if you cut out the bottom of the joist, then when you have a load on the joist, it's going to want to bend, what they call a bending moment. If you cut out the bottom, all that tensile strength is gone. So the
Yeah.
joist is going to want to deflect like that. And you can see the crack that's shot across there.
Yeah.
And that's because of the notching. So it severely compromises the strength of the joist. Exactly.
And we also have another structural issue, which is the
Yeah, this was a particularly bad home that I inspected recently.
Yeah.
It completely lacked a foundation, and it had very poor mid-structural support. So you could see that the floor frame, the floor joists, which normally rest on a beam, are actually kind of notched into the beam, which is
Yeah.
an old-fashioned type
Yeah.
of doing construction. But in terms of mid-structural supports, there's no pad footings, there's no proper posts. You have just various concrete blocks that are
Yeah.
actually falling down. You have two by
Yeah,
sixes.
honestly, even the concrete block is not even
Yeah, they
flat.
had excavated all the soil in the crawl space, and all the supporting blocks were falling down. So the whole floor was just
Yeah.
falling apart. It was
Also
comical.
have another one, which is the single
same building, that old
Same
house.
building.
Same building, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Different location.
Instead of having a proper post and beam system, they just have various 2x4s holding up the floor joists, and which are slowly collapsing from soil settlements. So
This is like the easiest thing to break.
yeah, yeah.
It makes no sense. Like that's the foundation of the house that it sits on.
Yeah, it was a bit of a sad case because they had spent a lot on renovations, but they didn't touch the structures.
So this is still a structural issue.
This structural issue, different building. This was an older building that was actually in pretty good shape, except for the rear foundation. The rear wall of the foundation, because at some point they had excavated the exterior side of the rear foundation wall.
Okay.
It exposed the footing to frost, and so as the frost expands, it kind of ate away. The footing started collapsing and shifting.
Yeah.
And then from hydraulic erosion, because moisture started getting in, because it's a stone foundation, it basically ate away at the mortar, and all the stones got displaced. So we're actually seeing under the foundation right there.
Yeah. So basically, this is a problem that comes over time.
Over time, from
like,
lack of
the
maintenance.
homeowners doesn't know about it.
Yeah,
You
'cause-
can mainly find out about it during an inspection.
Yeah, and
That's why it really matters.
it really matters, and it's something you'd find with older buildings that have stone foundations. So it'd be buildings pre-1950 or what we call pre-war buildings.
Foundation failure to the soil.
Yeah,
Is
so
it the
this
same
is
issue where
same-
the soil
same
is
issue.
being lost?
The same issue. So the last photo that we saw was underneath this wall.
Okay.
Because the soil that was supporting the foundation had washed away, the foundation itself is shifting and collapsing. So we're seeing both lateral buckling and thaw settlement, basically.
So if
soil
this thing
compaction.
falls over, it's gonna you're also gonna have a
Plumbing
issue.
issues, for sure, yeah.
Now, plumbing issues, on the other hand, are they more common or less common?
Definitely more common. Yeah,
Okay.
plumbing issues definitely more common than structural. One of the common issues that we see today with more modern construction is dezinkification.
Okay.
It's known as dezinkification corrosion or dezinkification attack, or DZA for short.
DZA.
Yeah.
So
Now-
what's DZA?
So DZA has to do with a type of plumbing system that is used commonly with modern construction called PEX, which is short for cross-linked polyethylene plastic, and that's the plastic piping that we're seeing. Now with PEX, the piping itself is generally fine. Some are bad, but usually it's fine. The issue is more with the fittings.
Okay.
And when they use the brass fittings, particularly the cheaper brass fittings, which is a lower quality brass, what happens is the zinc to content ratio in the cheaper brass is too high. There's more zinc than there should be. So the minerals in the water reacts with the zinc and creates zinc oxide, which is those white crusty balls that you see coming out of the brass.
Okay.
So the brass basically loses its zinc. Now in extreme cases, now I've never seen a case of that here in Ottawa and Gatineau, but I've heard out west cases like that. The brass has lost so much zinc that it becomes so mechanically weak that the crimp ring actually crushes the brass fitting and you get plumbing leaks. So with no warning at all, one day you have leaks all over your house.
Okay.
Like I said, it's very rare. I've never seen it in these parts, but what I do see in the more extreme cases in these parts is obstruction of the piping. So when you look at this photo, if you look at the pipe just before the fitting on the right there, you can see the white inside the plastic, the translucent. So that zinc oxide will tend to build up inside the pipe and it'll start to clog up your fittings.
Okay.
So if you have a bad dezincification issue, what happens after 5-6 years, you find that the water pressure isn't quite like it used to be because all your pipes are getting clogged
So it
up.
either clogs up or leaks,
Exactly.
but it's not a health issue.
It's not a health issue.
a plumbing issue.
Zinc oxide isn't technically bad for your health.
Okay.
It's more of a plumbing,
Plumbing issue, which is poly?
Poly B,
Poly B.
Poly B. It's short for polybutylene plastic piping. So this is an older type of plastic piping before PEX.
Okay.
Now Poly B,
The gray pipe, right?
That's a gray pipe, exactly. Poly B is a bit of a bit of a controversy. So a lot of insurance companies sometimes won't even insure you if you have polybutylene piping.
Okay.
A lot of home inspectors also raise it as a major issue. Now the thing with polybutylene is that the issue has to do more with the reactivity with the water. Now, in the city of Ottawa, as well as city of Gatineau, they use chloramine. So basically, they treat the water with chlorine, but then they add ammonia gas to convert the chlorine into chloramine. Now, chloramine-treated water, it's not as reactive to polybutylene. So technically, if your house is connected to the city of Ottawa's water supply or city of Gatineau, you shouldn't have any issues with polybutylene piping. I mean, it's been around since the 80s, and I've never seen any problems with them.
But still, it doesn't insure your house.
It's still an issue with insurance companies because they don't know the specifics. Now, if you're connected to outside of the city has well systems, municipal wells in Manotick, for example.
Yeah.
If you're connected to the municipal well system, it's still a city service, but it's different. That's chlorine only. Then you would have an issue with poly B.
Okay.
However, these houses that are connected to municipal wells tend to be fairly new construction, so you wouldn't have poly B anyways because of the age of the house.
Yeah. All right. Speaking about commercial building inspections, do you have specific challenges that you would face specifically with commercial rather than residential houses?
One of the big things would be the client's intent for the property. What are they planning on using the property for?
Yeah.
Making sure it can fit their needs. Also, flat roofs.
Okay.
You see a lot more flat roofs in
Yeah.
commercial buildings versus residential.
How about restaurants? Are there any specific special steps that you have to take?
Yeah, definitely. I do a lot of restaurants. Restaurants, things would be like fire safety, occupant health and safety. So make sure the fire exits are all lit, fire alarm pull stations are present, fire extinguishers, the wet chemical fire suppression over the stove hoods, and things like that.
So we got a couple of photos from an inspection that you made. If you don't mind, just go with us through the what happened over here.
So this was one to remember. This is a job I believe I did last year. Last summer. This was an out-of-town job. I don't want to get too specific as to where it is for client privilege, but this was a particularly bad property. So what we're seeing here is it was an old house, century home, and it had old cast iron plumbing. Now the problem with cast iron piping is it corrodes, and particularly if you have laterals or horizontal sections of piping, most insurance companies will insist that you replace it. And the reason is it corrodes and it cracks or rusts through. Okay. So if you have a lateral, you have standing sewage, and eventually if it rusts through, it leaks into your basement. So this house, I walk into the basement and I just smell sewage, raw sewage. So right away I go to the laterals and I see it's raw cast iron, and this is a main lateral, a 4-inch, and it's completely corroded away, and what you're seeing there is toilet paper. So when they were flushing the toilet, it would spill out onto the basement floor, with the toilet paper, and
And they never find out about it?
it was a very sad case.
Okay.
It was they were moving. The house had been leaking. The roof had been leaking for 10 years. There's mold everywhere. The plumbing was leaking into the basement. It was a bit of a mental health situation.
Okay.
So they had to be.
Is this from the same house?
From the same house, yeah. This is
So that's
another
the
part.
crack.
That's the crack. The
So
same
it's-
pipe further up, but you can see the crack that formed because of the corrosion. So that one's about the.
Sewage
So that's the pipe we saw earlier, and you can actually see the raw sewage inside the pipe. So it's a.
So this is a sewage pipe, not a
That's the sewage
water
pipe,
right?
Exactly. So yeah, so that's so that pipe, like I said, was dumping.
That's the leak, right?
That's the leak, yeah.
Okay.
So all the urine was collecting at the front because everything, the grading of the slab was going towards the front. So the discoloration you're seeing on that panel is not rust; that's actual human wastes. Yeah.
And then we have, this is
So that's
still
the same house. Yeah. Their roof had been leaking for at least 5 years.
So they had problems in the roof and in the
Roof, basement, everywhere, electrical, plumbing. It was quite the house. And yeah, the bedrooms was mold everywhere. The ceilings were collapsing everywhere. And this was actually above one of their beds.
Yeah. When you do an inspection like that, would you just advise the buyer not to buy?
I mean, my job is not to tell them to buy or not to buy. My job is really just to point out the issues, and I
Yeah.
try not to get too involved on that side because I don't want
Okay.
to step on the realtor's toes. But I do tell them that, yeah, I mean, are you sure you know what you're getting into?
All right. Speaking about technology, now it's evolving. Is there any changes when it comes to home inspections because you have technology in the tools that you use and also in the houses that being built?
The infrared was a big step. With thermographic cameras, especially modern thermographic cameras, the high resolution ones.
Yeah.
That was a bit of a game changer, as I say.
What about green homes?
Green homes, that is something a little bit different. So actually, one good example would be electrical services. Today, a lot of people are buying EVs, electrical vehicles, but most homes, particularly homes that are gas heated, have only 100 amp services.
Okay.
And the problem with a 100 amp service is you're a bit limited on your electrical availability. And if you put a big 60 amp 240 for a level 2 EV charger, there's a chance you'll be tripping your main breaker from overloading.
What advice would you give for home buyers and even real estate agents to make the most out of a home inspection?
My best advice would be to follow me around, ask questions, take notes, but one thing is not to be too focused on note taking. So sometimes I have clients where they'll be writing everything down, and the problem is they tend to miss some because I'm very talkative during my inspections. I like to explain everything, go into the theory behind everything.
Yeah.
And if they're taking their notes all the time, they miss some of the things.
And they're going to get it in your report.
They're going to get it all
right?
in the report.
You're gonna-
Exactly.
yeah.
Because my reports are kind of unique. They're full narrative. So everything I say will be in the report.
Okay. Can you share one of the most interesting inspections you've made? Something surprising that happened?
There's one place I did last year on the Quebec side. And it was a multi-unit residential, so it was a triplex, I believe.
Yeah.
And I was at the third floor for the third floor apartment, and the attic hatch was at the third floor, obviously.
Yeah.
And so I climb up my step ladder, and I pop the hatch open, and about a pound of marijuana comes falling down on me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was it a drug dealer's house?
I don't know. I assume because it was a pretty large quantity. I kind of laughed. The realtor found it funny. I made a joke. I said, "Well, I guess they don't know it's legal now." But that was a bit of a surprise. Yeah.
I think it is legal, but there's a limitation to how much.
I have no idea.
A common issue that people are worried about is moisture in basement. How do you look for that?
If the foundation is visible, I look at the concrete for signs of moisture permeation, particularly efflorescence.
Okay.
Efflorescence it's basically a crystalline residue. It's the mineral salts that's within the concrete. So
Efflorescence.
This is efflorescence on the slab. So this would be an example of when the foundation is covered over with drywall. If it's covered over with drywall, then I tend to like to look at the slab if it's exposed. And here I'm seeing that there's efflorescence built up at the base of the foundation wall and staining running down. So the efflorescence, what it is when moisture permeates through the concrete, it'll pull the salts that are naturally in the concrete out with it.
Yeah.
So then as the moisture evaporates away, it leaves the salts behind on the surface. That's what efflorescence is. So when you see efflorescence, that's a sign that moisture is permeating through the concrete. And in this case, it was coming through the foundation wall and pooling on the slab.
Are there any misconceptions about home inspections? What do people expect and what do they actually get?
new home buyers tend to have the impression that a brand new home is perfect.
Okay.
Or should be perfect.
Yeah. And it's not the case.
It's not the case,
100%.
not at all, no.
Yeah.
They tend to get hung up on cosmetic issues. They expect the paint to be perfect, the trim to be perfect, tiles to be perfectly smooth and flush. And unfortunately, in fact, I spoke with a builder's rep from one of our larger builders in the city, I won't name who. He said that the builder's point of view tends to be that, if you're buying a generic mass-produced home, you're paying for a generic mass-produced home, so you should expect builder-grade paint job, builder-grade windows, and builder-grade roof.
But it shouldn't be the case.
It shouldn't be the
Because
case.
you're buying it's called a brand new.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. So you should be getting a premium paint job and everything, but unfortunately, that's not the case.
Yeah.
They go with the basics, and the Tarion warranty used to cover cosmetic issues, particularly acclimation damage, but unfortunately, they don't do anymore. So.
How can you assure home, in this case, people buying new homes, how can you assure them that they're doing the right step, and what do you basically cover in new homes inspections?
Basically, I look at all the systems from structure, plumbing, HVAC, electrical, attic, insulation, ventilation, roof, exterior, building envelope. So it's more or less the same inspection. However, I do focus a little more on the Tarion aspect. So, for example, usually when I come in, it's after the PDI, but before the 30 days. So as an added value, I'll review the PDI, the pre-delivery inspection that they did with their builder, to see what did they see during the pre-delivery inspection with their builder, and has it been corrected? If not, then I'll add it to my report.
You've performed thousands of inspections. Let's bring it to life, and we have some photos from inspections that you've done.
Sure.
So if you don't mind, just explain what are we looking at?
So this is from a restaurant, and this has to do with cast iron piping, like I was talking about earlier.
The one that gets corroded.
Yeah, exactly. So in this case, we can see that the main sub-slab lateral, which is the main service pipe, which connects the house or the restaurant to the main sewer under the street, consists of the original cast iron. So older buildings will have cast iron or clay as your main lateral. The problem with that is corrosion if it's cast iron. So if the pipe corrodes underground between the building and the street, soil starts to get in there, tree roots get in, it could clog up, and then suddenly all your plumbing is clogged and nothing works. With clay, it's more prone to penetration. So it's, again, tree roots punching through.
And then you have water contamination.
Then, you have sewage blockage, basically. So every time you flush the toilets, it all comes out your floor drain. And so it's not pleasant, put it that way.
What about water damage? So this is the moisture
That's
detector.
the moisture meter, That's one that I particularly like using. It's the General Tools MMD 950, a deep penetration meter. And in this case, they had a leak from the flat roof above. And I had noticed a little bit of damage in the paint on the gypsum board bulkhead. And the bulkhead showed a little damage on the paint, but I didn't see any water stains. But then when I hit it with my MD, it hit about 25%. Baseline readings were about 2. So 24 versus 2, that's definitely a big
really
delta
high.
there.
Thing, head wall flashing.
This is where that zoom camera comes in, the photographic analysis. So here, I mean, I could see it from the street, obviously, that we're missing head wall flashing. But then when I zoomed in really tight at the office, I could see that half the flashing was not there at all. So the problem with no head wall flashing is it's supposed to go over the shingles, then tuck in behind the siding and tuck in behind the building wrap. And without it, then when it rains, if wind-driven rain gets pushed into that gap under the siding, it gets into the wall cavity. Then you have water damage in your walls, mold, rot, all that fun stuff.
Big bills, basically. You have huge bills.
Big problems.
We have high-grade elevation.
High-grade elevation, that's another issue that comes up that has to do more with grading and landscaping. Normally, you should have at least 4 inches of visible foundation wall at all locations, preferably 6, but at least 4. When
so
the
this
ground,
house, you can't really see the foundation.
Exactly. The ground is pretty much right up to the siding. Now, your bottom of the siding is your weeping area. Bricks have actual weepers, openings between the bricks, every third brick. Siding is basically loose at the bottom. It's designed by design that way so moisture can drain out. Because the way houses are built is it's a 2-layer rain barrier system. You have your siding, an air gap or drainage gap, and then your sheathing, building wrap, insulation, all that. So that gap between the siding and the building wrap is to allow any moisture that gets in behind the siding to drain out at the bottom. If your grade is right up to the bottom of the siding, that moisture can't drain. And that's when you start getting water damage inside the wall cavity, particularly the bottom plate, the rim joist, the lower section, just above the foundation stone. Another issue with high grade is insects infestation, carpenter ants, for example. If you're too close to grade, that's when insects and ants can get into your wall cavities. So carpenter ants is a particularly bad thing because they basically eat up your structure.
Yeah.
They're kind of like termites, but they don't actually eat the wood; they just tunnel through it. But they can cause a lot of damage.
Yeah, exactly. This is a no drip edge.
Drip edging is basically a flashing that tucks under the shingles at the bottom, goes over the fascia, and it prevents water from getting into the sheathing under the shingles. So I saw that there was no drip edging, but then after when I zoomed in tight during the analysis, I saw that it was actually multiple shingles overlapping. So not only had no drip edging, but they had put the new roof over the old roof, which is also bad.
Wow.
So it was
Okay.
multiple failures in one.
This one needs a roof change, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I told him, you could tough it out another 5 years, but yeah.
And the S trap.
The trap is basically, if you look under your sink, the pipe
There's
always
always
does a curve and then it goes out. And normally you have a P trap. They call it a P trap because it's shaped like a P.
Yeah.
An S trap is called an S trap because it's shaped like an S. S traps are not permitted by code. And the reason is they're prone to siphoning. So say you fill up the sink full of water, then you pull the drain plug, all the water comes gushing down. So as the water goes through the S like that, that moving water creates a vacuum, and it can actually pull all the water out of the trap. So with an S trap, it's prone to siphoning, and if you have siphoning, it's going to empty out the trap. You'll have an open trap. With an open trap, you'll have sewer gases and sewer smells coming out of your drain.
Okay.
So if you have an S trap and you find that your bathroom smells like sewage,
That's the reason why.
Yep.
Okay. And basically the trap is a blockade.
Exactly. It's meant to hold it full of water, and the water is supposed to act as a seal to prevent sewer gases and smells from coming out your drain. But if it
If you
empties
see an
out,
S trap, that's you got to change.
you gotta change it. Yeah.
Okay. And then we have additions.
So additions, yeah.
It looks like the villain from Batman.
Yeah, it's
Two-Face.
a bit of a unique building. It's basically, this consisted of 4 structures in one. You had the original load-bearing brick structure at the front. Then you had one addition which took up the entire
Side.
right half.
Okay.
And then the left quarter, the left rear quarter, had another 2 additions, bottom one and then a top one. So it was like multiple buildings in one. And the thing with additions is you kind of have to look at the structure more in depth.
Okay.
You have to look for things like rotational cracks, differential settlement, where one addition might be sinking away from the other.
Basically, this is a house that they wanted to make bigger.
Yeah.
And that's the addition.
That's
and
the
then
addition, yeah.
You have
When you
2
enlarge the
engineers
building.
working, 2 builders working on it. So.
Exactly, yeah. So lead pipes are still around in Ottawa. It's obviously old buildings,
Yeah.
pre-war buildings, but they're still around. The city is slowly replacing all the old lead water pipes. Because with lead, obviously people are worried about lead pollution. You know, lead is exactly not good for your health, right?
Yeah.
With lead water supply pipes, it's not actually as dangerous as most people fear. The city is pretty good at testing the lead, for lead content in the water, and the city has a lot of rebate programs too. If you want to have your lead water pipe replaced, you can sign up for a rebate or a full refund.
Yeah.
But the city is slowly replacing them all.
Moss and vegetation.
Yeah.
So we're looking at.
This is a flat roof above a restaurant,
Okay.
a
We're
flat
looking at a
roof
roof.
that was very overdue.
Yeah.
So with flat roofs, in Ottawa, you generally have 2 main types. You have a built-up roof, also known as a burr roof, BUR, or a tar and gravel. It's basically all the same. The other type is a modified bitumen. So this is a burr roof, a built-up roof. It's basically several layers of tar and felt with gravel on top. And when you're seeing vegetation growing out of it,
What does it mean?
moss, it means
what's an
that
indicator?
it's been poorly maintained. The leaves have gotten into the gravel, the top layer, and it's rooted into the felt below.
Okay.
So your roof is basically due to be replaced because now
Yeah.
you're at risk of roof leaks and bubbling, alligatoring, all that
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah. Custom showers. So as an inspector, I like the factory molded acrylic, 1-piece acrylic showers because they never leak. It's 1 piece of acrylic molded in the factory. They're easy to install. They're simple and they're practically maintenance free.
Yeah.
The opposite end of the spectrum is custom ceramic showers. Now, they're very pretty and they add
look nice.
value.
They
They
look
look
great,
nice, but if they're built poorly, so say there's no waterproof membrane behind the tiles, or in this case, the ceramic floor was basically sloped incorrectly. So the water wasn't making it to the drain. And originally it had a center drain, and then they added 2 more drains on each end.
And still,
And it still wasn't working.
Sloped towards
No,
the
'cause
drain.
You could see the water's all pooling in the
Yeah.
middle. So every time they would shower, they would have to take a squeegee mop and push the water into the drain.
That's,
So
that's something you
Yeah.
want to do after every shower. So we have landsliding house.
yeah, this was an interesting one I did about a year ago.
Yeah.
It was a house right on the shore of the Ottawa River on the Ottawa side.
Yeah.
Out east. And basically, what was happening is they had removed all the trees on the hill from the property down to the riverbank.
Yeah.
And the soil was slowly displacing, what we call lateral displacement.
Yeah.
It's caused by frost expansion and hydraulic erosion. And so as the soil was slowly falling into the river, the house was moving with it. So the rear foundation wall had sheared right.
I can see a huge crack
see
at
the
the
big
foundation.
crack, yeah. That's the rear foundation wall that literally broke away and was starting to fall away.
And this is caused because of the
It's caused by the
tree
soil
removal.
movement, exactly. So by removing the trees, because the tree roots were holding the soil together, but if you remove the trees and the roots die, then there's nothing left holding the soil.
Yeah.
They built a retaining wall, but the retaining wall was too weak, too small. It was buckling, it was failing. And they tried to fix the failing foundation with steel straps, but I
they
mean,
gotta
that's like a
fix the
Band-Aid.
cause.
Yeah, exactly. That's not going to help much.
So in this case, they have to fix the
So
soil.
in this case, they had to. I told them, well,
Plant trees.
you'll have to bring in a geotechnical engineer, but in the end, it's going to be a full heavy retaining wall, either stone gambrels or some type of pinned-in retaining wall. So big job. Yeah.
Big fix. We have no insulation.
Yeah.
We actually have taken a look at the flare.
Yeah.
So that was no insulation. This is what it looks like.
This is what it looks like, yeah. So this is in an attic. That was quite the surprise when I peeked my head in the attic and I see there's no insulation at all for this house. So normally there's always some insulation. Even a 100-year-old house will have, a couple of inches.
Yeah.
But this house had nothing. So basically in the winter, if you're heating your house, all your heat's just going to bleed right through.
Yeah.
That'll cause a number of problems. One, you'll have a pretty serious warm roof problem. A warm roof issue is when your roof literally warms up in the winter because of lack of attic insulation or lack of attic ventilation.
Okay.
And that causes premature shingle failure, ice dams causing roof leaks, mold in the attic, all sorts of issues like that.
So the life of the roof is gonna
Life of the
deteriorate.
roof, for this case, it'd be cut in half. AC condensate overflow, yeah. So if you look at this furnace, you'll see there's some
I see
rust stains.
some type of leak.
Yep, you see the rust stains and the rust stain on top of the furnace. So your AC is what we call a split system. So you have the air conditioner condenser outside, the big metal box.
Yeah.
And then your furnace, above the furnace, you have the duct, the plenum. Inside the plenum, you have the evaporator coil, which is the refrigerant from the condenser gets pumped through that coil, and that's what cools the air.
Okay.
And it also, as the air gets cooled, it also loses its humidity, it loses its moisture, it dehumidifies. So that moisture drips into a drip tray, a condensate drip tray, and it drains out through a hose. Now, I always preach annual maintenance for your furnace and your HVAC. Part of the annual maintenance is cleaning that drip tray and cleaning out that hose. Because if you don't do that, what happens is the hose can become plugged up. If that hose becomes plugged up, the condensate from the AC will start to overflow.
Yep.
And the risk with that is if it overflows into the furnace and drips onto the heat exchanger, it could corrode and crack your heat exchanger prematurely. And a cracked heat exchanger, it's an instant red tag for your furnace. You have to replace the furnace because the risk is
whole furnace
the whole
has to be
furnace.
changed.
Yeah, because if your heat exchanger is cracked, what happens is when the furnace is running in the winter, the fast-moving indoor air from the blower runs past the outside of the heat exchanger.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I always use the analogy with my clients. I always say it's like a car on the highway. If you roll down your window crack, all the air gets sucked out of the car.
Yeah.
It's the Venturi effect.
Yeah.
Same thing with a furnace. The indoor air moves past the heat exchanger, and if there's a crack in the heat exchanger, that fast-moving air creates a vacuum. It's going to pull the combustion gases out.
Yeah.
So then you got carbon monoxide, which is, as I say, the silent killer, which gets into the ductwork, and then you don't smell it, you don't know it's there, you go to bed, and you don't wake up. So that's why a cracked heat exchanger, by law, it's a red tag. Your furnace has to be replaced.
Have the falling chimney.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, I was surprised when I've seen it. I was like,
Yeah.
Santa Claus is gonna be upset this Christmas. I was like, oh.
Exactly. So this is an older building that has an old masonry chimney. Basically, it's a brick chimney enclosure with a clay flue. So in this case, so the chimney, when you have a masonry chimney, it's on its own foundation. It's on its own footing. So it's attached to the house, but it goes deep underground below the frost line. There's a concrete footing holding it up. In this particular case, for whatever reason, the footing was failing. It was you're getting differential settlement of the chimney.
Solely the chimney's footing is.
So the chimney's footing was failing, the chimney was breaking away. So that crack that we're seeing, that's what we call a rotational crack.
Okay.
It's a crack when you have two structures and one structure is falling away from either frost heave, thaw settlement, whatever.
Yeah.
Thaw compaction. And that's what was happening here. So the chimney was basically falling away and breaking away from the house.
Wow.
So-
Asbestos duct trap.
Asbestos duct wrap. So you were asking about asbestos earlier. So this is something we sometimes come across. This has to do with older homes that had oil furnaces. So back, way back in the day, they had oil furnaces. And the thing with oil furnaces, obviously, they burn much hotter than gas furnaces.
Yeah.
So oil furnaces if they can also sometimes catch on fire. If they catch on fire, then your ducts become red hot. So they would tend to insulate the ducts with asbestos as a fire retardant. You would see that, or sometimes you'd also see asbestos fire protection board wedged in between the floor registers and the wood flooring. So it's asbestos, and it's an issue, particularly if it's within arm's reach, or it can be touched. Because if it's left alone, I always say if you leave it alone, it'll leave you alone. So it's not a risk as long as you don't disturb it. But if it's an area where you can brush up against it or scrape it, then you scrape it, the fibers get released, and then you breathe them in. So I always recommend to have it removed and abated. But this type of asbestos is what we call type 1 abatement, and that's something you can easily DIY. I always explain to my clients how to do it safely, and I also provide them with a government pamphlet on how to do your own DIY type 1 abatement. It's what they call glove bagging. You soak it, wear mask, gloves, peel it off, bag it, tag it.
That's it.
Disposal.
Simple.
Yep.
Okay. We also we have the cracking cast iron.
So this is a different property than that crazy building, but similar issue.
Okay, so it's the crack, right?
It's the crack, exactly. So it's what they call pinholing or pitting. It corrodes from the inside out, and eventually a crack will start to snap through. So this pipe was just about to go, and raw sewage was about to start dumping into the basement. Luckily, we caught it in time.
Yeah, so it needs to be changed.
Yeah.
You have damp stone foundations.
Yeah, so stone foundations, common with older buildings, pre-war buildings, so pre-1950. It's an old type of foundation system. It's basically built on site using large stones mortared together, like a big stone wall, basically. Stone foundations are very strong structurally. They're very heavy, very thick, massive, heavy foundations. So great structure-wise, but they're very damp. And the reason is because of the mortar. The mortar is very porous, so you tend to get a lot of capillary activity, capillary draw, which is basically like a sponge force. So if you have a stone foundation and you're geographically located in an area where the soil is very hydrophilic, so say it's clay, leda, then what happens is the hydrostatic pressure in the soil against the foundation wall will start to push that moisture into the mortar, and then the mortar will draw it to the warm side, to the basement. So here we see a stone foundation, and you can see the water stains along the base of the wall, and that's the water leaking through the stone and mortar.
But if that's your foundation, how can you fix this problem?
Well, with stone and mortar foundations, it's tricky. Usually, the most often, I'd say probably 80% or more of the time, it's caused by bad grading, surface stormwater management.
Okay, so if you fix the grading,
Exactly,
then you fix the
exactly.
damping.
It's grading, and I'm sure my fellow home inspectors are probably laughing right now because it's by far the most common problem that we see. Almost every house has grading issues. Yet, ironically, it's the most common cause of basement moisture problems, and that's sort of thing that most people fear.
This one is the knob and tube wiring.
Knob and tube wiring, yeah. So that we often come across it with old homes where it's been deactivated. It's very rare to come across live knob and tube. I'd say probably 98% of houses it's been removed now. But you get, once every year or two, you get that rare one where you find live knob and tube. Now, this obviously has been deactivated and removed, but we could see the actual porcelain knob and the remainder of the cable there.
Yeah, and that's what it looks like.
That's what it looks like, yeah. An insurance nightmare.
No grounds.
No grounds.
This is you checking for electricity, right?
Yeah, so this has to do with the knob and tube wiring. So if I'm doing a house that's pre-war and I see there used to be knob and tube wiring and it's been removed and replaced with modern wiring in the basement, I always ask myself, is it still present where it's hidden in the wall cavities upstairs in the ceiling cavities? So what I tend to like to do is check the plugs for grounds. So if I see that the plugs are coming up as ungrounded, but in the basement I see it's all modern grounded NM wiring, and the house had knob and tube wiring, that's when I would start thinking, did they tie the original knob and tube to the NM wiring somewhere in a hidden junction box? And is there live knob and tube? Because if they had rewired the whole house with modern grounded wiring, that should be grounded. It's coming up ungrounded, so we might have hidden knob and tube, which is a huge job to remove.
When inspecting a detached home, especially in older properties, what are the unique elements that you focus on?
The main thing with older homes would be stone foundations, like we talked about just earlier. That and mid-structural settlement is a common thing. That's when your floors are sagging, basically. So I always give the rule of thumb that we use, which is if your floors are sagging towards the middle and your floor is shaped like a bowl, usually that's not a sign of a structural issue. It can be, but usually it's not. If your floors are sagging towards the exterior walls, that's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a sign that either your foundation's failing, or your wall structure is failing. If it's an old building with balloon framing, if the studs are rotted at the bottom, they're towing out.
Yeah.
Then your walls are collapsing, bringing the floors down with it. So I would say if you're walking downhill towards an exterior wall, that's a bad thing. If you're walking uphill towards an exterior wall, then you're okay. So mid-structural settlement, it's either caused by a creep. That's when the wood fibers from age sort of crush and everything kind of comes down slowly, or just bending moments. The joists get old and they start to kind of bend.
Yeah. With townhouses, on the other hand, though, you have shared walls, you have sometimes even shared systems. How does it change your approach towards inspecting one?
The main thing with townhouses would be the party walls. So the party walls, short for partition walls, it's your fire separation
We
between
actually
the
have
two
a photo,
buildings.
I believe, for the party wall.
Ah,
This is
yes.
it, right?
Yeah. So
That's
this
what
is
it looks like?
So with party walls, you have two main types. You have concrete block or you have gypsum board, drywall. I find in my experience, post 1980 homes is usually drywall. Pre 1980 homes, you more often see concrete block.
Okay.
Either one has an F1 rating. Either one will give you at least a 1 hour fire barrier. Concrete block's a little better, particularly for soundproofing. It's a heavier, denser wall, so you'll get less low frequency vibration, less bass bleeding through, versus a wood framed drywall party wall. Now, a lot of clients, when I say their party wall is drywall, they're worried about sound transmission. Now, I tell them it's not like drywall between two bedrooms. It's for one, it's a different type of drywall. It's what they call Type X. It's thicker, it's heavier, and it's got a fiberglass mesh in it. It's a fire-rated drywall. And you have multiple layers. So you have your 5/8 Type X drywall, you have your insulation, then you have more insulation, 5/8. Then you have your drywall, interior drywall on both sides. So you have multiple layers of soundproofing between you and the neighbors. So you're not going to hear your neighbors talking or watching television. If there's a loud party next door, then you might hear more bass versus a concrete block wall. But the main important thing with any party wall is that it's complete and tight to the roof in the attic. That's one thing we always check for. That there's no holes or openings in the attic where smoke and flame can get across the unit.
Condos are a bit different because you have the building management handling certain responsibilities. How do you approach inspections when it comes to condos and what you focus on?
It's a good question. A lot of people ask me, is it worth getting an inspection done on a condominium, particularly a high-rise apartment? You'd be surprised. I see a lot of issues with condos, even with high-rise apartments. I had one just a couple of years ago, I believe. It was an older building downtown. And it was just a nightmare. The bathroom, I had picked some water leakage, some water damage above the tub. And they were doing a fire alarm retrofit at the same time. So there was a hole in the wall. So I used a borescope camera and I fed it in. And the main sanitary stack for the building, this was a 20-ish story building. So there was about another 6 floor levels above. The main sanitary stack for the 6 floors above us was leaking. It had corroded and was leaking into the ceiling of that apartment right above the tub. So I was telling my client, imagine one night, you're in the tub, glass of wine, relaxing. Suddenly your ceiling collapses with 20 pounds of raw sewage on you while you're in the tub.
Wow,
so that was a pretty serious issue. And that apartment had a lot of issues. There was water leaks through the window frames. You'd be surprised. Even condos, you see a lot of issues. But the thing with condos, it's not just finding issues. It's also a good opportunity to learn about your new condo. Because during my inspection, I give them a tour. I explain to them how to work the fan coil, how to change the filters, how to, if the windows have limiters on them, why do they have limiters? And all sorts of things.
Let's talk farms. When it comes to rural properties, how do you approach an inspection, especially with having different elements such as a septic system, you have barns?
Well, with rural, as far as the building itself is generally the same as an urban home. However, with septics, you have the septic system for one, which is different. Now, septic system, that requires a separate inspection from a septic inspector, because that's a whole other inspection. It takes pretty much as long as the home inspection does. So there's a few septic inspectors in Ottawa that I work with regularly. And because they'll open up the tanks, they'll examine the sludge layer, check the sludge wall, check the baffles, the filters, and they'll also have to dig test holes in the leaching bed to make sure, do a flow test, make sure the leaching bed is absorbing the effluent properly. And of course, you have wells. For wells, also, I usually work with Mo Reyes from Canadian Water Inspection. He's sort of the local Yoda when it comes to water treatment. So I usually recommend a well inspection for water testing, bacteria, hardness, sulfur, things like that.
You have a story where you discovered a major issue in one of these
Yeah,
rural areas?
I do. It's a bit of a sad story.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about during COVID and the seller's market, how people were buying with no conditions.
Mm.
So this family had bought a farmhouse. It was a big place. It was two buildings. You had the original farmhouse, about 100 years old, on a heavy stone foundation,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a rear addition. And we were talking about additions earlier.
Yeah.
It was a big addition, about 2,000 square feet, two-story addition attached to the rear. So they bought the house with no inspection. I think his brother was a contractor. I think he had looked at it briefly. They didn't see anything. And then they've been living there for about 6 months, and they had noticed cracks in certain areas. And so he called me up for an inspection because he was worried about the cracks. So I said, yeah, no problem. So I show up, and as soon as I pull up outside, I notice that we're talking about rotational cracks. I see a big rotational crack between the rear addition and the original farmhouse. So right away, I'm like, oh no, it means one of the structures is moving. And I know it's not the farmhouse, it's on a massive stone foundation, it's not going anywhere. So finally, long story short, I found out that the rear addition, they had basically, whoever built it had basically faked the foundation.
Wow.
The foundation only went down about 12 inches below grade. And so it was well above the frost line. So when the ground freezes in the winter, everything heaves up.
It pushes
and then
the foundation up.
Exactly. Then when it thaws in the spring, you get cumulative.
And the builder knows.
The
So
builder
basically,
knows.
It was
so
done on
It
purpose.
was a construction fraud case. Yeah. And when with each thaw cycle, you get what's called cumulative thaw compaction. So it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And in this case, it wasn't a matter of just jacking up the building and retrofitting a foundation because you have two buildings attached. You literally had to break the house in half, move the addition out of the way, build the foundation, and reattach the house together. So we were looking at $250,000 probably or something.
Just
It
to
was
fix it.
insane. Yeah.
So this is one of the risks that people might encounter when they skip inspections. Do you have any other major risks where you advise a buyer to make sure that they get the house inspected?
I mean, definitely an inspection is important. I always recommend getting inspection, whether it's a condo, whether it's a new home, or it's a 3,000 square foot, 100-year-old mansion. The main thing, I'd say get an inspection. If you can't get an inspection, say there's a lot of competition, a lot of competing offers, give us a call, try and get us in during a showing. Like I said, the MCC, we can do it in 45 minutes, and at least you'll have good peace of mind knowing that you're not going to be facing any major surprises. Worst case scenario, if you can't even do that, I mean, me personally, I'm always happy to help. If you're there during a showing with your realtor, take some photos, take some videos, call me, email me, send me the photos, send me the videos. I'll be happy to look at them and give you free advice. I never charge for email consultations. So, and most of my colleagues, I'm sure, are the same. That's what we're there for. We're happy to help.
Last question of the day. What should homeowners regularly do to make sure that their house is in good shape between inspections?
Main thing, grading. Grading.
How can you check for grading?
Grading, just make sure that the ground slopes away from your house. That's the main thing. And like I was saying earlier, I'm sure other home inspectors are laughing right now because it's by far the most common thing we see, and it's the one thing we always preach. And I'm sure a lot of realtors are laughing too because we always preach this. You want to make sure that, by code, basically your property should be like a hill. I use a pitcher's mound as an example. The house should be sitting on top of the hill, everything draining away, all four sides. What tends to happen, particularly in frost-laden areas like Ottawa, is you get a differential in freeze-thaw activity in the soil between the soil that's close to the foundation and the soil that's further away. Because in the winter, the heat from the basement will bleed through the walls, regardless how much insulation you have, and you'll get more freeze-thaw activity in the activity in the soil near the foundation. So that causes the soil close to the house to settle more rapidly than the soil further away from the house. So at first, when the house is first built, everything drains away 5% or more, but then slowly over time, it kind of reverses. So within the first 4 to 6 feet drains towards the house. Then what happens is when it rains or when the snow melts, that surface storm water starts to pool against the foundation. And then it starts to penetrate the soil. That causes a buildup of soil saturation, and it causes the hydrostatic pressure to build up in the soil that's against the foundation wall. So then you got more hydrostatic pressure, more moisture is being pushed into the concrete, and concrete is not waterproof, it is porous. You'll have some capillary activity that's going to pull it through. Also, if there's too much saturation at the footing, it can bypass the weeping tile, and it'll get in through the keyway between the wall and the footing, or from the slab and the footing. Then you have sub-slab penetration. So grading, I'd have to say, and in fact, it's actually a fact, over 90% of basement moisture issues are caused by bad surface stormwater.
Okay.
And it's funny because a lot of times I get called for consultations because they say, oh, I have moisture in my basement, I have a leak in my foundation. And, you know, you watch shows on TV, on HGTV, and it's always something major. Like the whole weeping towel's got to be dug out and replaced, and it's $50,000.
Yeah.
Realistically, 90% of the time or more is just backfill.
Yeah.
Get some topsoil and backfill your property.
Oh, that's it.
That's it. Just regular old topsoil. You want to just use topsoil, so from the foundation wall to the property line should slope at 5%.
That's it.
Now, with older properties, eventually it gets to the point where the entire property drains towards the house. Now, yeah, you can backfill your entire lot, but
Yeah.
that's a big job. It's really not necessary. As it's really the first 6 feet that's important. You want the first 6 feet to drain away from the house.
Yeah.
Once you're 6 feet away, you can do what's called swales, which are basically shallow drainage ditches, and the water just drains into those and towards the front of the house. So, yeah. That's the main thing. Yeah.
So this is the end of our episode, Eric. Thank you very much for coming in today.
My pleasure.
And I appreciate your time. For people watching us from home today, what's the best way to reach you?
Best way would be either calling me or going to my website.
Okay.
My website's easier to remember. It's ottawahomeinspector.ca.
Yeah.
You can email me at eric@ottawahomeinspector.ca, or you can call me at 613-748-5564, or send me a text message.
Sounds amazing. Thank you very much, Eric.
No problem. Thank you.
Appreciate you.